Okay, so this customer has opted for a WARN EVO. So we have a EVO 10S, so a 10,000 pound synthetic line winch. So great winches for the money, and we're going to go ahead and pull it on out. Now we're going to have to remote mount the solenoid. So the solenoid is going to be coming off the winch itself, and we'll be building an extension with some cabling to put the solenoid further back under the hood of the truck. So this is a planetary style winch, meaning that the motor is over here and the gearbox is on this side. There's actually a drive shaft that runs through the center of the winch over to the gearbox from the motor. So the integrated solenoid is what this would be referred to. However, it can unbolt. All the modern winches now, they've learned that you need to make these where they can unbolt, because there are some bumpers that there's just not enough room to put the solenoid inside the bumper with the winch itself. So we're going to be taking this off, and then we're going to be making these cables, longer cables, and remote mounting the solenoid under the hood in a safe spot. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the solenoid, or the gearbox, excuse me, and I'm going to put that in neutral, which is going to let me be able to unspool the cable. So I'm just going to go ahead and unspool the cable. And there's a lot of cable on these winches. But by unspooling it, it's going to give me access to be able to get to the solenoid bolts that are holding it in place. So now the screws have been removed. They're just small Allen screws holding the plastic housing in. I can now lift the housing up and remove it from the winch. Now this can be remote mounted now in a separate location, and the winch itself is fully functional as it is right here. So now that this is off, I have the ability to get in here to be able to undo these ring terminals, and I just got to pull these 4 Allen screws off to do that. There is your solenoid. So this is a nice modern solenoid. It's actually one of the nice sealed ones all the new winches typically use. This most likely is a wireless receiver, most likely, and then this is the primary solenoid pack that's going to activate the power leads that are coming from the battery, this is going hardwired to the battery, and then these 3 controllers go to the winch itself. When I get down to the winch side of these cables, the top of the plugs actually have a splash of paint on them from Warren that's identifying the 3 different colors. So we know which one's green, yellow, blue, but over here we don't have that luxury on the solenoid. So we're going to make note of what color is what, so we can recreate that as we make our longer solenoid leads. So for these terminals, they're not marked from Warren, so I'm actually going to use colored electrical tape and put a little piece of tape by each one of these, so I automatically always know what they are. So make sure that we never get a chance of getting it mixed up. I got my phone photo as a backup, but of course the little piece of tape is going to be a real telltale sign as to what color goes where. So now we're going to break these loose. I'm being very careful with these terminals. We don't want to put a lot of stress on them. Definitely not using the power tool to undo these. So now these can come off, and we're going to want to reuse these little boots if we can. And we do. So we're going to take those off. Your winch is going to include a ground lead, black ground lead that connects to here. You're going to undo this bolt, put this on, and then run this line to your ground of your battery. Now we're remote mounting this, so we're going to have a longer one of these anyway, but there is this little tiny wire which is grounding the solenoid. And so we want the solenoid to be grounded on the same piece. We don't want to not have this. If this is not grounded directly to the solenoid, things like wireless control and stuff like that won't necessarily work correctly. So we're going to make sure we extend this correctly as well, so that it's going to mimic exactly what it's doing now. So we're going to add an extension to this and bring that wire down. But for now, I'm going to take this off, and so now we can take this entire solenoid pack and build a little shelf for it and mount it in the engine compartment. So I have the solenoid mocked up. It's just sitting on some plastic and some foam. This is where I'm going to build a little perch to put it inside this particular truck. Everybody's going to be a little different for how you're remote mounting a solenoid, but in this particular case it's going to sit right here. I'll build a custom bracket for it. I already confirmed the hood closes. So now it's building the cables, and one of the things you can do to save yourself time on the cables is that previously the power cable, the primary lead cable, is nice and long. Well, it's long enough to be moved to become one of the remote mount pieces to the actual winch itself. So now I need a power cable though to go from the solenoid to the battery. Well, in this particular case, the battery is within a few inches of the solenoid itself. So one of the longer cables, in this particular case it was one of the blue ones, that was used on the winch actually is long enough to reach to the battery terminal. So I can come down off the winch solenoid comfortably and come over and cross over to the side there. In this particular case, it is going to create a crossover across the top of this box, but in this particular case, I know this customer is going to prefer that I do this the most efficient way for him, and he's not going to want to pay to have a custom battery cable made specifically just for this. So we're going to be able to use this one and save him a few dollars in the process. So one of the first things I'm going to do, if I'm making this the new power lead, well, right now it's got the blue heat shrink on it. So I'm going to use red electrical tape, and I'm going to change this blue to red. So I know this is now becoming the new primary. And then I'm going to be using colored electrical tape on all of the new leads that are going down to the winch so we can keep track of what's green, red, and yellow. We're not trying to protect this, we're just trying to change the color just for better identification. So I'm not trying to get a waterproof seal or anything with it. We're just trying to eliminate that blue and make it red so we know that this is a primary lead in this particular case. We now have our new power lead. So all of these leads are going to be ran from the remote battery or solenoid mount location down to the winch. So it's going to be going across a lot of things in the engine compartment and through the front headlight wall of the truck of sheet metal. So we're going to make sure we want to protect these lines. So of course they have the plastic that's already on the PVC that's on there, but we're going to go ahead and use a standard split loom. If we were making these leads fresh, we could use a woven loom, but in this particular case we're just going to use the split loom. So I'm going to be putting these on, and as they get put on, then I'm going to be securing them on the ends to the color that they represent. So I'm going to go ahead and take some green tape, because this is the green. Put that on the loom, stretch it around the loom, and it'll transfer it to the actual electrical connection. And that's that end. That's captured now. Now the loom won't pull back on it while we're finishing, put the split loom on. Now, there's the shortcut of not doing it, where you don't loom the stuff and you just risk getting an electrical short, which is a battery meltdown, which is basically a fire. So we're going to take these now and we're going to fish them through the internal part behind the headlight. Nice big openings in the frame. We're going to pass them along the inside of the fender here and bring them up to where our solenoid mock-up location is to get ready for the final wiring to go into place when we build the mount for the solenoid. So I'm just going to lay these across the front of the winch and start guiding these up. What we've done now on our remote mounted solenoid is that we have our cables. These are the three primary control cables coming from the solenoid to the winch. They've been extended. We have our colors telling us what each one is. And we put the boots back on for the factory connections just to protect those studs once they're actually powered up. But this is now ready to start getting routed and reconnected to the winch itself. So we're going to go ahead and get ready to put the winch in. However, there's one more cable that we need. We do need to make our ground cable. The ground cable is going to go from the winch directly up to the ground lead on the battery. We're always going to want to ground our winches directly to the battery, just like the power lead goes directly from the battery to the solenoid itself. The solenoid acts as its own breaker in that situation. So we're going to go ahead and build a ground lead just using from ground up. So we're going to make some cables here, battery cables, and this is a ground lead for the winch. So we're going to use, as far as tools are concerned, I'm going to be using actual cable cutters. This is an actual cable cutter, and the way that it works is it ratchets, and as it ratchets, it grabs the cable, fully supports it, and severs the cable as a whole. If you try cutting a cable using traditional wire cutters, you're going to find that it just goes flat, and it's very difficult to cut. It's almost impossible to cut through it, and when you're done, it looks like a very drunk beaver chewed through your cable. You don't want that. All right, so the next tool we're going to be using is going to be an hydraulic cable crimper. You change the dies out for the size of ring terminal that you're going to be using or crimping. In this particular case, for the size of cable that we're crimping, you figure out half the diameter of the cable, and that's your crimp size. And it's going to make a beautiful crimp. It makes a nice hex crimp. But these dies are changed out. The kits come with a whole bunch of different dies in them. It is a little bit of a cost, but these are not that expensive anymore. Of course, they're the Chinese imports, basically is what they are. I think this came off Amazon years ago and has made me a lot of battery cables ever since. And then lastly, the key piece of equipment is going to be a nice heat gun, and we're going to be using that to drop our heat shrink to the proper size. You could always use a blow dryer or if in a pinch, a small torch. As far as the cables go, what you're going to need is that you're going to need a good quality cable itself. In this particular case, this is a nice flexible multi-hair fine cable that we're using. And then we're going to have the appropriate ring terminals that are sized for what we're making. And so this is going to fit perfectly onto these cables. And then we've actually went ahead and opened up the hole size on these. These ring terminals came with a 1/4 inch hole. We opened up to 3/8 so it fits the terminals on this WARN winch correctly. And then lastly are going to be some pieces of heat shrink. It just happens to be pink that I've got for this one. That's fine. I can throw some black electrical tape because we are making a ground lead. And so the heat shrink's of size to be able to cover the ring terminal and then get a good bite on the back of the actual battery cable itself. Cut these maybe a little oversized, but that's fine. We'll go ahead and drop them on there and make some good cables. So I got my end of my cable exposed. I'm going to go ahead and, of course, always put the heat shrink on first. Don't do that last because it won't work, usually. Make sure my fibers are all nice and tight. And then I'm going to take a ring terminal. It has a nice little spoon on the ends there, and I'm going to kind of roll this as I do it. I'm making sure I'm getting every cable and every fiber in there. There's not a little hair sticking out, and there are not. So now this is ready to be crimped. So the slack's taken up. Now I'm making sure I'm keeping pressure as I push the cable inward. And I'm going to go ahead and start collapsing that now hydraulically. What we're doing is we're collapsing the ring terminal onto the battery cable. Now I'm going to release the pressure and it'll open right up. There's a beautifully crimped connection. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and slide the heat shrink up. I'm going to grab a good chunk of this so we're protecting all the way up back, and then I'm going to go ahead and fire up my heat gun and drop this heat shrink down onto the part. Done. So this end is completed now, and now I can go ahead and start routing this, and then I'll get my measurement for how long the cable actually needs to be. Got nothing against pink, but this is going to be a ground connection, so I'm going to turn this black just so there's no confusion that there's a positive lead on there. Again, I'm only using the electrical tape just to change the color. I'm not using it for waterproofness. Honestly, the heat shrink will take care of that, but this is now ready to be routed, and I'll get my measurement. So this needs to be able to go right about there on here for a nice ground. I will come back and loom this, of course. So I got my ground lead here, and I'm going to use the measurement of the other leads because the ground's going to be basically the same length as the other ones. I'm going to give it a little extra length just to make sure I got space for making a loop or making routing. So we're going to cut it right about there. So take up the slack like a pair of handcuffs. And now I'm just going to ratchet it, and it's going to cut the cable beautifully. So now that I've got the end measured, I can now disconnect it from the battery. I'm going to go ahead and remove it, and now I'm going to go ahead and complete this other end with a ring terminal, and then I'll put the split room on the lead completely, and then this will be ready to go as a ground lead. So now we're going to start hooking up our cables, and we have our color codes that we set up when we made them. Now it's really critical that when you tighten these, you snug them. You're not cranking them down. It's not really high torque, because if you do, you can always snap these terminals off from the motor, and this is the motor right here. So these are the 3 controller pieces, and that's the ground connection. So we have all of our cables now custom made for it. I've transferred the boots over. And I'm going to go ahead and tighten this one down so it's done. So that's in place. So now I can take the rubber boot, pull it down, and completely put that over the connection. So now it's ready for the next two. So I can do the blue on the bottom and the green on the top. Ground. So this is the connection that we cut from the up above, and so we're going to go ahead and put this on for extension to this. And I'm going to give ourselves a little extra room there. I'm using as much of this loom as I have for the small size loom, so but I'm going to go ahead and cut that. We're going to go ahead and strip this back. Put this in our takedown butt connector. This is a ground lead, so I'm going to put black across this because we're using an orange wire because it's the only primary of size that I had. So now this is ready to be routed down with the other ones. And this one being ground, there's no boot for it. So we got our blue and a boot, yellow and a boot, green and a boot, ground cable to the motor ground, going back to the battery, and our ground lead going back to the solenoid pack. So we're just going to tighten these up. We're going to zip tie them together so they're nice and tidy. We've made this gigantic cable assembly to provide control and power and communication to the winch. I'm very careful tightening these down. I'm not over torquing anything. You got to be really careful when you're working on this, because if this wrench touches anything ground, it'll short. That's the positive on the battery. So our remote wiring is now done. We got all the large leads that are coming up to our solenoid pack. Our solenoid pack is permanently mounted inside the engine bay. We're able to put it in a spot and make it look like it's actually part of the engine. And now when we're off-road and we need to use the winch, we can actually pop the hood up and then remove this cover here and have access to be able to put our remote control in. The whole time that we're driving around, this is under the hood, nice and warm. It's not going to get full of water, and it's super protected.